Welcome, 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 welcome. We're going to do another one of our streams. Just getting the chair right. I'm sorry about that. Got to get the chair all rolled around, and there we go. Glad you all are here. Always a pleasure to talk with all of you. It is Wednesday evening. So much that we can talk about. Glad you're here. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the notifications bell. We always want to get the notifications. And for everyone who's watching, right down below, I have a link to a very, very, very good documentary made by my good friend, Ramiro Funes. It's called Nicaragua Against Empire. He has just gotten back from Nicaragua, and he's made a beautiful film exposing the lies of U.S. media against the socialist government of Nicaragua. So if you get a chance, link is below. Check out Nicaragua Against Empire by Ramiro Funes. Link is below. This film should go viral. This film should have thousands and thousands and thousands of views. Everyone needs to know exactly how much they lie about Nicaragua, how amazing the socialist government of Nicaragua is, the amazing things that they have achieved for their people. So below is a very important documentary. Very good stuff. Be sure to check it out. Be sure to check it out. It's really, really important, good stuff. So, folks, glad you all are here. Always fun to interact with all of you. Great little community that we've got going on here. Great community that we have. I wanted to let you all know that the manuscript for the BreadTube book is done. I am now proofreading it. I'll pass it on to the proofreader and then the layout person. Great cover design, already done, completed by a good friend of the program, Arthur Porter. And it looks like we are going to have a book pretty soon. The BreadTube book is done. A book exposing the internet fake socialist BreadTube universe. It's going to be done. And thank you. And it is the collective effort of all of us here. Everything we achieve is very much everything we achieve is very much a product. Like I said, we've got Ramiro's documentary below, linked. I just gave it a great endorsement, a great film. You really need to check out Nicaragua Against Empire, linked below. The BreadTube book is on the brink of being completed. I have finished the manuscript and I've printed it out and spiral bound it, and I'm going through it with my pen, making little corrections. And then pretty soon I'll be handing it off to the layout guy, and we've already got an amazing cover designed thanks to somebody who's part of this community. We are growing by leaps and bounds, folks. We really, it's unbelievable how quickly this channel has exploded. There are probably people watching this right now who remember when there were 20 people watching these videos, when there were 10 people watching these videos, but now we have blown up. We have just exploded. And it's thousands of people watch these conversations. The We Are City Builders manual is being used for classes all over this country and internationally too. Dust James, he's here in the United States, but David Fox and Helen Woolley are doing classes on it in Australia. And there's folks in the UK that are having classes on it. And we have just blown up. We hit the 16,000 subscribers mark, and we are just marching ahead. We are a little revolution happening right now on this channel. Watching your lives in the morning, because I rarely get notifications from YouTube. Just want to contribute my part. Thank you, brother. Well, thank you, Matthew Jones. You are a beloved, welcome member of our community, and thank you very much. Wow, we are doing something really, really special here. So I'm going to give some opening remarks. Then I will do the roll call, where I call you out as I see you, names and locations. And then we will answer your super chat questions, and then we'll be done. That's how we do the show. That's the format. It's a winning format. It's a way that we can get to know our audience. It's a way that I can get my opening remarks, and then you can all get your questions answered. I like answering questions. A lot of times people know how to get me talking. They ask really good questions that are very, very to the point, and I answer them, and we have some of the best content on here is from the Q&A, right? Those super chats, they have an amazing way of it's like someone throws you a curveball, someone throws you a softball, you hit it out of the park, And I mean, every so often I will get a really good question on here. Now, some of the questions you all send me in the super chat section, sometimes I have to figure out exactly how I'm going to come at them, because sometimes they're a little bit difficult to answer, but that's the thrill of it, right? Is I enjoy answering the questions generally, right? I enjoy answering them. And so, you know, it's kind of like I'm learning the art of answering questions and giving good answers that educate and inform my audience. You all are getting your questions answered. And, you know, we have the roll call, so everyone knows who everyone is. And it's mind-blowing, the international audience. We got people in Norway and Sweden and Iran and Russia and in China and you know, we got people in Australia, we got people all across the United States, Oklahoma, Texas, you name it. I mean, it's just utterly amazing what we do here at this channel, you know? I don't have the huge budget. I'm not in a fancy studio that I own or something. I mean, I technically am in a fancy studio right now, but I'm in the break room and it doesn't belong to me. I'm in the break room of a fancy studio right now. But there you go. But, you know, we don't have a huge budget here. I mean, I'm talking into my phone, right? I'm talking into my phone at this moment. And we don't have a huge budget. We're not, you know, we don't have a whole team of people and all this, but we get it done. We get it done because it's valuable, because it needs to be done, because no one else talks the way we talk. We're fighting an uphill battle, and people are hungry for what we have to offer. People are very, very, very hungry for what we have to offer. So we do it. That's how we do it, and I'm proud of our community. It gives me so much hope to see what our community is capable of, to see how quickly we have grown, to how quickly the Center for Political Innovation is growing and expanding, to see people like Ben Norton pick up our phrase, the synthetic left. Did you see that? Ben Norton can't stop using our phrase, the synthetic left, you know, can't stop using it. And thank you, Andre, for the super chat. He can't stop using it. Ben Norton is always saying the synthetic left this, the synthetic left that. Now, I wish he'd tell his audience who invented that term, the synthetic left, but if he doesn't, that's okay. You know that Ben Norton's watching these streams. I mean, where do you think he got the term synthetic left? You know, and there's other people too. There's people around Ben Norton, his little hubbub community. They're paying attention to this, and that's because what we do here is very special. As I said, we are throwing the newspaper over the wall. We are talking about things that in the future everyone will be talking about. We are the cutting edge. I tell people we are the velvet underground of politics, right? You know, the Beatles, you know, were much bigger and much more mass marketed, couldn't afford to take the risks, but they would go and listen to the band The Velvet Underground with Lou Reed and Nico, and often things that were done in music that were done by the Beatles were first done by the Velvet Underground. The Velvet Underground was not as well known. They didn't sell as many albums as the Beatles did, but everyone who bought a Velvet Underground album, everyone who bought it started a band, right? That's what they talk about. They were the vanguard, the avant-garde, the cutting edge. We are the political avant-garde. We are the political cutting edge. Right? People are listening to what we say, and it's not just them. There are some other names I could name. I'm not here to call people out. Someone will reinterpret this and say I accuse people of copying me. I'm not doing that by any means. But there are certain people who certainly didn't used to talk in ways that they now talk. There are certain people who didn't used to talk about certain countries and certain historical issues the way they do, but thanks to our influence and the influence of our community, they talk very, very differently about those issues. And that is the real magic of this, right? We are blazing trail. We are really blazing trail, so we should really be proud of ourselves. Being part of the community around this live stream, around the Center for Political Innovation, being part of the unnamed diet beverage gang. Look, there's people saying our slogans at this point. That I mean, all over the internet, you get people saying "out of the movement to the masses." People I've never heard of, people who don't even know who I am, are saying "out of the movement to the masses." Out of the movement to the masses. Where did they get that from? Out of the movement to the masses. Where did that come from? That came from us, right? It's everywhere now. It's everywhere. We are sending out ripples that just keep bouncing and bouncing and bouncing. It is unprecedented, right? You know, what we're doing here is utterly amazing. Amazing stuff. So we are on fire. We're marching forward. The amount of influence that we have, it's pretty amazing. So like I said, I just wanted to get that out of my system. Thank you, Andy, for the super chat. Much appreciated. Just wanted to get that out of my system and just tell you all how excited I am about what we do here and the work that we do here. And so now, with no further ado, I will jump into the opening remarks, then followed by the roll call, then followed by answering your super chat questions. So with no further ado, the opening remarks. Folks, what does it mean to be a communist? What does it mean to be a communist? What does it mean? Is one a communist because of what they believe? Is one a communist because of what books they've read? Is one a communist because of what organization they are a member of? Is one a communist because of what they do and the activism that they engage in? What does it mean to be a communist? I'm not necessarily here to answer that question for you because I know in different countries around the world, the word is used differently. For example, in the Soviet Union, if they said so-and-so is a communist, that meant he was a member of the Communist Party, right? It was assumed that everyone in the country supported the Soviet Union, supported the government. So it wasn't about what you believe. It was assumed, it was a statement. If someone is a communist, that means they are a member of the Communist Party. If someone is a member of the Communist Party, he's a communist. Someone believes in communism, but they're not a member of the Communist Party, they're not a communist. That was how the language was used. And in fact, there are some strange interviews, right? There's a famous interview with Dean Reed, who was an American country music musician who became a communist, moved to the Soviet Union. And they interviewed him on 60 Minutes in the 1980s. And they said, "Are you a communist?" He said, "No, I'm a Marxist, but I'm not a communist." And they said, "Why are you not a communist? I mean, you support Marx and Lenin, you support the Soviet Union, you support the government of East Germany where you live. So what do you mean you're not a communist?" He said, "Well, I'm not a member of the Communist Party. And the way we talk in East Germany, you're a communist if you're a member of the Communist Party. If you are not a member of the Communist Party, you're not a communist." And that's how it's used in a lot of socialist countries. It's assumed, it's just assumed that the population agrees with the ruling ideology. But one is not a communist unless they're a member of the Communist Party. However, I also remember when I was living in my little town in Ohio, I do remember that there was some controversy at the city council. I had a high school teacher who used to show us the city council meetings. We would watch the video recordings of the city council meetings. We would actually watch them in my senior government class. We would watch the city council meetings. And I remember there was a woman who came. She came to the city council meeting. I don't know what she was angry about. I think she was angry about taxes, or she was angry about, what was she angry about? She was angry about something, about a new law they had in the town or something. And she said, "You all need to stop being communists. Stop being communists." She accused our city council of being communists. She said, "You all need to stop being communists." And it wasn't clear, I think she was accusing the city council of being dictators or being authoritarians or something like that. But she said, "You guys need to stop being communists. Stop being communists." That's what she said. Another interesting anecdote about my little town in Ohio. I remember somebody I went to school with actually showed me a news article from my little town from the 1950s. This news article was very telling. I will never forget this. Somebody in my little town, and thank you for the super chat. Socialist states, major socialist to react to, okay, major socialist States react SLA and red. Okay. And I remember in my little town, they had the newspaper archive at the library, all on microfilm. Somebody found this article and they showed it to me. And it was about my little town in the 1950s. And apparently in my little town in the 1950s, my little town in Ohio, the first black family to purchase a home, the first African-American family to actually own a home, not rent, but actually own their own house in my town, bought their home. And the way the local newspaper decided to report it was with the headline, you can't make this up, "Take That, Uncle Joe." So apparently, Stalin had been making statements condemning the United States for racism, and saying that racism showed that the United States was not truly believing in democracy like it claimed. Stalin was criticizing the United States for racism. So the local newspaper in my town, after the first black family in the town, they bought a house. The headline in the newspaper, the front page of the newspaper was, "Take That, Uncle Joe." And if you read the article, it was all about how Stalin had said that America was racist. But clearly it wasn't, because this black family had actually purchased a house. So that clearly showed that there was no racism in the United States. And you read the article, and it's like, you have to remember, this is at a time that Jim Crow segregation was still in effect in the U.S. South. This is at a time lynchings were happening. This was a couple of years before the lynching of Emmett Till. I think it was like 1950 the article came out. And this article came out declaring that this black family purchasing a house in my little tiny town in Ohio proved that Stalin was just wrong. Take that, Uncle Joe. And the article, I wish I had it. I wish I had it with me. So maybe I could dig it up or something. But if you read the article, there were some lines in the article. It sounded like The Onion or something. It sounded like satire. It was so disgusting. This was the height of McCarthyism, 1950. It said something to the effect of, in America, anyone can work hard and get ahead, even black people. I mean, it was like so racist, the tone of the article. And the article itself was pretty racist, but it was just, this black family has bought a house in our town. So clearly, the allegations made by the Soviet Union and the Communist Party about the United States are untrue, because look, we even let this black family buy a house. And I mean, it was just the most unbelievably racist article. And it was like shocking how you have to, how does one get into the mindset of America can't be racist because a black family has bought a house somewhere, even though there's Jim Crow all throughout the South, even though there's lynchings going on, but America can't be racist. And not just think that America is not racist on that basis, but have the gall to then publish a headline, "Take that, Uncle Joe," like it's like an own, like you got him, like, "Take that, Stalin. You said that we're racist in America. Black family owns house. Clearly you're wrong, Stalin." I mean, that was the tone of the article. It was shocking to me, right? It was shocking to me reading the article. And I remember, I think it was my high school history teacher showed it to me, and he said, "If you want an example of people being stupid, Caleb, this article is a great example of people being really, 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 really stupid." And it was very, very, very stupid. Take that, Uncle Joe. I remember that. But I also have another story. Which is that I remember when I was first getting politically active, going to protests and demonstrations, rallies. I don't do that anymore. I'm a journalist. But I did when I was younger. When I was more of an activist, I did that. Now I focus on journalism, education work. But when I was going to demonstrations and protests, I remember there was a member of my family who said to me, you know, Caleb, if you want to be an activist, you want to go to rallies, you want to protest, nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. Back in my day, there were all kinds of people doing that. There were people marching for civil rights. There were people marching against the Vietnam War. There was a whole organization, I think they called it Students for a Democratic Society. It was a big organization, but none of those people were communists. Never heard of any of those people being communists. Never heard of any of those people being communists, right? And it's funny because this person was simply, they believed what they were saying was true, but this was a statement of ignorance. Because at the end of the day, all of those people were communists. All of those people were communists, right? Who was marching for civil rights long before Dr. Martin Luther King had been around? Communists, right? Read about the Scottsboro Nine. Read about what was done, about Angelo Herndon. Who was protesting the Vietnam War? The first demonstration against the Vietnam War was called by Youth Against War and Fascism, which was the youth wing of the Workers' World Party. And they called it in coordination with the Progressive Labor Party, a group of Maoists. Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, eventually broke into factions, right? It was dominated by the Progressive Labor Party and the Weathermen, the Revolutionary Youth Movement faction. It broke into two different Maoist factions. They didn't split over communism, they split over which communist group got to be in charge. During the 1960s, there were three big currents within the anti-war movement. You had the moratorium and the peace parades, they were called. That was led by the Communist Party USA. The Communist Party USA would have demonstrations against the Vietnam War that included Democratic elected officials and often included clergy, Catholic priests, ministers, rabbis, etc. They would have mobilizations, and a lot of times they weren't really against the war. They were calling for negotiations. They would rally around the slogan "Negotiate now," etc. The Communist Party organized huge outpourings for peace, huge outpourings against the Vietnam War. Negotiate now, peace in Vietnam. The Socialist Workers' Party, the Trotskyites, they organized. They had the national mobilization, or the student mobilization to end the war in Vietnam. And they would have demonstrations in Washington, D.C. that were hundreds of thousands of people. And it was peaceful, legal, single-issue politics. And they would march against the Vietnam War. The MOB, the national mobilization, was led by the Socialist Workers' Party, the Trotskyites. And then on top of that, you had the more radical Students for a Democratic Society, the Black Panthers, the Weathermen, the various Maoist groups. They also were a big part of the anti-war movement. That whole 1960s episode that we hear about now, it's kind of talked about romantically on television, but that was all communists. That was all communists. There were communists all over that. There were Maoists and Trotskyists and Communist Party USA people, and it was all communists. You wouldn't know that, though. The member of my family who told me that, they didn't really know about it. The way U.S. media portrayed it, you wouldn't think that. But yeah, there were communists all over the upsurge, the political upsurge of the 1960s. Another funny anecdote. I remember at one point, I took geometry in summer school. It was an option I had when I was in high school. I took geometry in summer school. And I was actually there, I was taking it ahead of time. But I was there with a number of people who had flunked flunked geometry and were trying to graduate. And it was, you didn't take it. They only had one summer school place in the whole county, so it wasn't at the actual school I went to. It was at another place. I remember I was in this class, and there were kids in there who had been arrested. There were kids in there who'd flunked, everything and were failing. And, it was a small class of people. We took geometry in summer school. I took summer school geometry one summer. And I was in summer school taking summer school geometry. And, that was a little bit of a rougher crew than I normally hung out with. At one point, there was a kid who brought speed. and he gave everyone in the class a speed pill. You know, speed, like the drug? I didn't take one, obviously, me being the goody two-shoes that I am. But, you know, they didn't seem to care. The teacher was just kind of doing his own thing. And, you know, he just gave us worksheets at the beginning of the class, and we're just chilling there in geometry class. And, it's geometry, and everyone passed no matter what. That was the other thing. It was pass-fail, and you automatically passed. It was just, you were just there because they needed you to be there because you'd flunked geometry before, and they were there. It was like a procedure. It was a disgrace. American education is a disgrace. But I'm sitting there in the geometry class, summer school geometry. I'm sitting there, one day the kid was passing out speed to everybody to show what a cool kid he is. He's giving everyone drugs, and there's one kid who was there because he brought a knife to school, and so he'd been expelled. So he was there taking geometry in the class, kind of a rough guy. Another guy there who would, it was kind of like The Breakfast Club. You ever see the movie The Breakfast Club? It was a little bit like that. It was a little bit of a rougher bunch than I generally associated with in high school. But then again, I was whatever. I was there, and, we have all this free time because the teacher just gives us, worksheets at the beginning of the class, and so we're just sitting there, and most of the day is just kind of chilling in the room, we're not really doing that much. And I remember, I have a lot of communist books there, and at one point, this kid who was there I don't know why he was there, he sees me and he's like, "You're a communist." I said, "Yes." And he's like, "Communists are a bunch of faggots." Really nasty, homophobic line. "Communists are a bunch of faggots," he said to me. I'm used to this, right? This is high school bullying. I'm just like, yeah. But immediately, 5 or 6 of these, gang kids behind me are like, "No, communists are not faggots." And I'm just sitting there, I'm like, "What?" And he's like, they're looking over my shoulder, I'm like, "No, communists are not faggots. They're like, communists are badass motherfuckers." And I'm just looking like, "What?" And they're like, "No, my uncle fought in Vietnam, and those communists, they used to blow shit up, and they had traps they would set. Communists are badass motherfuckers." And then this other kid's like, "Yeah," he's like, "Man," he's like, watched a movie about North Korea last night. Communists are badass motherfuckers." He's describing how Kim Jong-il, eats people alive and all this. "Communists are bad motherfuckers. Communists are badass motherfuckers." And I'm just looking around. It was certainly a surprise to me. I never thought that I would be, but that was certainly a moment that I will never forget. Someone told me that communists are a bunch of faggots, and then a bunch of other people disagreed and made clear that communists are a bunch of badass motherfuckers. So there you go. I've said my limit of swear words for the day. I've said the unpleasant homophobic F word, and then I said the other F word, and there you go. But that was my experience in summer school geometry class, where I learned that there are different opinions about communists among juvenile delinquents. What else? What else? I'll tell two other stories related to this that I've experienced. This is one story that I heard. I did not see this happen, but I heard it from somebody. And this was somebody who was an activist in the 1960s. And their father was a Republican and a conservative. They were going to anti-Vietnam War protests and such, but their father was an uptight Republican conservative and a college professor in New York City. Their father was like a math professor in New York City and just seemed like the most normal guy. And they were going to anti-war protests as a teenager. And one day they went to this anti-war protest and they bought a communist newspaper. And so they were in New York City, and their dad was this uptight math professor, and they had just been at the anti-war protest. They didn't really want their dad, who was a conservative Republican, to know about it. But their dad saw that they had a newspaper, and he saw it, and he said, is that the Daily Worker?" The teenage kid got a little bit nervous. "Is that the Daily Worker?" The kid said, "Yeah." And the dad started crying. Burst into tears. Because before he'd become a Republican and a conservative, he'd been a Trotskyite. And the best years of his life had been in the 1930s, the late 1930s, when he was a Trotskyite. And he had many beautiful memories of selling communist newspapers. It's a strange story, but, that his father expected his father to be angry, had no clue about this, right? Assumed his father's just this Republican, uptight, conservative. He's probably a neocon. Turns out that his father had burst into tears because he remembered the best years of his life. The best years of his life were when he was a Trotskyite in the late 1930s, selling the Trotskyite communist newspapers up and down the streets of New York City during the Great Depression. That's a story that sticks with me when I hear it, because it reminds me of something that I did actually experience. I didn't actually experience that, but this reminds me of something I did actually experience, which is that there was a guy I knew in Cleveland, and he was a couple decades older than me, but he had been in the Socialist Workers' Party, the SWP, the Trotskyite group, and he had dropped out of the Socialist Workers' Party for various reasons. But, the financial crisis hit 2008, 2009, and he wanted to get active again. He wanted to be a communist again. And it was difficult, and he approached the group I was in, and we were working with him. He didn't end up joining, unfortunately. They didn't like him. It didn't click. It wasn't a good match, which I thought was ridiculous. I was so angry. It's like, you shouldn't have to be best pals with people in order to join a group, but when a group is small and irrelevant and a decaying sect, you kind of do, right? You have to be, when there's a social skills requirement to be in the group. But, he wasn't able to actually join the political party I was a member of. But he did a lot of volunteering with us, and he eventually moved on. But he was maybe 20, 30 years older than I was. But every time I would get in the car with him to go someplace, every time I would go over to his house and hang out with his grandkids, he would start talking about his time with the SWP, with the Socialist Workers' Party. And he would tell me about, when he was part of the Young Socialist Alliance and this demonstration he went to, or when he was part of the Young Socialist Alliance. The best years of his life were when he was a communist, right? And this guy, he was trying, the whole reason he was trying to join the group I was in is he was trying to get back to that. He saw the financial crisis, saw that all the stuff he'd been saying all those years about overproduction and capitalism were true, and he was trying to get some of that back every time I talked with him. And I'll never forget this, which was that I was very short on money when I was living in Cleveland. I used to sell my blood plasma. That was a way I could get, a quick $50, pump your veins, pump a bunch of blood plasma out of your veins, and they shoot they separate the plasma from the blood, and they shoot the other blood back into you. It's really a gross process. I was selling my blood plasma. I was doing anything I could to get an extra few bucks. My life in Cleveland was not very sustainable. I kept getting little jobs in gas stations, and I wasn't a very good gas station attendant. It was, this was the financial crisis. The economy had, well, that sound familiar? The economy had crashed, and things were not good. And, okay, I'll talk about that, SWP. And, I remember that one night I got it in my head that I could make some extra money because I had a bunch of old electronic equipment, a bunch of old wires and stuff. And I got it in my mind I could make money by stripping all these old cords and wires that I had and selling the copper, right? And so I did that. I spent the whole night with all these old cords and things that I had, stripping the rubber off of them and balling it all up into this ball of copper. Just balling it all up into this ball of copper. And I had it, by the end of the night, I had a pretty heavy ball of copper, of wire copper. And I thought, I'll take this to the scrap yard and sell it, and I'll get some extra bucks. So, I I spent the whole night, I had all this copper and all these old cords, and I'm stripping them and, taking the copper wire and combining it until I had this heavy, what I thought was a very heavy ball of copper, right? And so I went to I remember the good friend of mine, he picked me up, and we drove to the scrapyard. And I walked in with my ball of copper, and walked in, and I said, okay, we'll weigh it. He weighed it, and he said, all right, that'll be 75 cents. And I'd spent the whole night for 75 cents. So he gave me my 3/4, and I was like, oh boy, I was very, very disappointed. Very disappointed that I only had 75 cents worth of copper. I thought there was actual money in this, right? I'd heard about people going to strip the wire out of, homes, that had been foreclosed or whatever. I thought that this was outsourcing. Very good. I thought this was going to get me some money. So I remember I got back into the car with this friend of mine, this guy who'd been in the Socialist Workers' Party decades ago, like in the late 80s. And I said, well, I got 75 cents. And he said, well, he kind of laughed. I mean, it was pretty sad that I'd spent all that time stripping all this wire to get 75 cents. And he said, stick with the politics. I said, what do you mean? He said, stick with the politics. And he said, take this as a lesson. Stick with the politics. Stick with the politics. And when I heard that, it struck me because, I didn't realize it then, but he was saying he wished he'd stuck with the politics. He regretted whatever had happened between him and the Socialist Workers' Party. He'd regretted, going back to a normal life. And he was telling me to stick with the politics and what that really meant. What that really meant at the end of the day. What that really meant was, stick with the politics. Don't go back to living biologically, right? That's some of the communist groups used to refer to that. They'd say when somebody stopped being a communist, when somebody went and gave up on communism, they'd say they go back to living biologically. And what did they mean by living biologically? What they meant was that you're definitely alive in the biological sense. But when you abandon the class struggle, when you abandon fighting for a cause that is higher than yourself, when you abandon your ideals, when you abandon, the historic challenge, history's challenge, you're still alive. You're not dead, but are you really alive? Right? You're living biologically, right? And the truth is that, in a lot of ways, there have been times in my life where I was quite, I was quite frustrated, and I was quite unsatisfied with a life without politics, with a life without the revolution. Right? I think about, how unhappy I was as a teenager before I fully embraced Marxism-Leninism. I think about the times in my life where I've had to scale back being involved in educating people about socialism or being involved in activism or whatever. And it's not fun, right? This gives your life a new flavor. This gives your life something special. We should all pace ourselves, right? We should all pace ourselves. We should all be sure to practice self-care. We should all not bite off more than we can chew. But this certainly does give a flavor to life. To be fighting for something bigger than yourself, to be an anti-imperialist, to understand that the working class will eventually take power, the means of production will eventually belong to the working people, that we will get to a stateless, communist, classless world, that we're on the right side, that the people who run our country are evil, the ruling class of the United States is evil, and that we, the working people, The anti-imperialists are going to be remembered as being on the right side of history, while their lies and their deceptions and their wars are going to be remembered as atrocious and criminal. To be, able to say that you made an effort to stand up against the injustices that exist, that's something very, very special, right? And, if you give that up, if you make peace with the society around you, especially this society. I mean, I don't know how you could make peace with this society. Maybe in the 50s you could do it. But it's very hard to make peace with this society. Now, I mean, look at the country. It's falling apart. I mean, the suicide rate and the opioid addiction and the lack of infrastructure. And I mean, good night. If you could make, to make peace with this society, to make peace with this society requires you to lose some of your humanity, I would argue. Nothing wrong with having a job and feeding your kids and living your life. That's totally fine. Nothing wrong with doing what you have to do to get by. We all do. But when you really make peace with this country and this society, to make peace with capitalism, Chernobyl. To really make peace with this society requires giving up an element of your humanity, right? And I see some people in the chat that are saying that they feel like communism or being a communist has been bad for their mental health. And I have to tell you that I think that you're missing the point, right? It's been bad for your mental health in the sense that you now know the emperor has no clothes. You know that the society around you is built on lies. And you're frustrated and you're demoralized by that. That can change if you are able to become active. Being a communist, being aware of the horrors of American capitalism and imperialism, but not being able to do anything about it, that is going to be a huge source of frustration. Right? I mean, that would cause anyone to lose their mind, right? To know how evil this society is, to know how evil this system is, to know how unsustainable and how we're headed for a big financial crash and there's a danger of a new world war, to know all of the problems of this society, but not be able to work for something bigger. I mean, that is a situation that would put anybody over the edge. I don't blame you. But if you're able to learn the truth, and do something about it. If you're able to learn the truth and become part of a community of people who do know the truth, and are working with you to change the course of history, to stop the danger of a new world war, to stop the capitalist system that grinds people into poverty, to stop the march toward a low-wage police state. If you can become part of a community of people who are not only aware of the horrors, but actually in a position to take action, to change the course of history, and push forward the cause of right against the forces of evil and injustice. If you are in a situation where you can actually take action, it can be one of the most healing, amazing, special experiences one can imagine. But there's a difference there. And that's what I would like to do with the Center for Political Innovation. I'd like to give you the ability to be part of a community and to be part of an activity. But we should be real about this. Right? That communities have problems. Communities sometimes let you down. Right? And in order to build a sustainable organization, in order to be part of something bigger than yourself, well, you have to make compromises. You have to put up with things that you might not like. You have to sometimes work with people who disagree with you on positions that you feel very strongly about. You have to deal with other people's inadequacies. You have to deal with other people's shortcomings. You have to become aware and be made aware in painful ways of your own shortcomings. You have to push yourself. You have to do things that are uncomfortable for you. Right? Being part of a community that is fighting for socialism, being part of a community that is striving to build socialism, it's very amazing. It's very delightful. It's very joyful. But it can be very challenging and difficult at some times. It can be very challenging and difficult. There's going to be times where you feel like you've been let down. There's going to be times where you feel so frustrated you just want to walk away from it. There are going to be times where it's not going to be good enough for you. There's going to be times where you're going to be let down. And that happens too. But the question is your commitment. The question is, what are you willing to do? Look, folks, at risk of, oh God, I'm always offending people on here, so it doesn't really matter. I stayed in the Workers' World Party for 8 years. For 8 years, I stayed in the Workers' World Party. And, you know, I even tried to stay in at the time that things went bad between us. You know, I did. And for most of those 8 years, I'd say about halfway in, I realized this was a sinking ship. It wasn't going anyplace. But it was my community. It was the group of people I was with, and I was committed to communism, and I didn't have another place to go. So I stayed in because I was committed to it, right? You know, and because I hoped that something good could be salvaged from it. You know, I stayed in for 8 years. Most young people that join that group are out in a year, out in 2 years. I stayed in for 8. I stayed in for 8 years, even though about 4 years into it, I realized this wasn't going anyplace. But I at least stayed in, and I at least did what I was obligated to do, and I tried to maneuver. And at the time that I was out of the group, I was trying to even find a way I could, you know, kind of leave, but not fully leave the way certain other people did. Right? There were people that just kind of drifted out, and I was hoping I could just kind of drift out and leave on good terms, but that was not made possible. That was not made possible. You know, there were certain people that were determined that I go out with a big fight, you know, and so there was a smear campaign and things got ugly. And even then it was sloppy. I mean, my goodness, they couldn't even bring themselves to properly expel me, and I wasn't going to resign. And so it was just this kind of like, it was a mess. It was a mess. But even then, even as things got bad and it was basically being made clear to me, I couldn't continue to have a career and be in the group. And, you know, they didn't even ask me to give up my career at any point. They didn't give me an ultimatum. It was just kind of like, yeah, you're popular and stuff, so we don't want you around. You know, I mean, look, I tried. I tried because I understood the importance of having an organization, because I understood the importance of doing something. And afterwards, I mean, yeah, there was about a year, I would say, of living biologically. But even then, I was constantly talking about socialism. I was constantly writing. I was constantly publishing things, and, you know, going to Brazil and giving speeches. And even then, I was talking about it. And then pretty soon, you know, pretty soon, I was working with Students and Youth for a New America. Right? I never joined that group. I'm not a youth and I'm not a student, but, you know, I was helping Students and Youth for a New America to have classes in New York City, and I was going to Rutgers and meeting with some of the people there, and I was mentoring people, and you know, I was giving classes and lectures, and even then, right, I was doing stuff because it's just I couldn't not do it. Right? Again, this gives meaning to your life in a way that folks who haven't done it and haven't lived it can't quite really understand. There's something about being a communist. There's something about being a revolutionary and a Marxist that gives you meaning, and it's something that people can't quite get unless they've done it. Look, you know, right now there are millions of people in this country that are suffering. There are millions of people in this country that are angry. There are millions of people in this country who want a new society to emerge. They want to get rid of the capitalist system and replace it with something better. And now is the time to organize these people into an effective movement that can actually get it done. But again, We have to save socialism. I've talked about synthetic left on here. I talk about that constantly. We talk about synthetic leftism and the fake leftism. We talk about that a lot on these streams. We talk about all kinds of stuff. We talk about the fake leftism and the problems that are out there. We talk about these things. We talk about it, and we got to change direction. And as I've emphasized over and over again, we've got to change direction. We've got to start moving in a new direction if we're actually going to get success as a movement. We got to learn from the existing socialist countries. We got to get to the masses. We got to get out of the movement and get to the masses. There's a lot of things that need to be done. There's work that we must do, but we're going to do it because no one else will. We're going to do it because we're driven. We're going to do it because we're understanding of how important it is, and we're going to do it because we're comrades. I started out my opening remarks tonight saying, what does it mean to be a communist? What does it mean to be a communist? Well, I'll end by repeating that question. What does it mean to be a communist? Find the answer for yourself. Determine the answer for yourself. Think about it. Wrangle with that question. What does it mean to be a communist? Because that's something that all of us need to figure out for ourselves as the moment becomes more and more pressing. And on that note, folks, names and locations, I will call you out as I see you, names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Keep the super chats coming because then I can answer your questions. Wow, how did that work? So I saw none and then they all just popped in at once. Ryan in Oakland. Tamara and Dario from Brooklyn. West Palm Beach, Manhattan. Calgary, Canada. Montreal. Chaya from Montreal, Tristan from Maryland, Billy Kane from Gateshead, England. I think you can be a moderator. You're now a moderator, Billy. All right, Detroit, Escondido, California, West Palm Beach, JT24 in Mississippi, Hungary, Ben, Clydebank, Alan in Chicago, Brad in St. Louis, Wisconsin, West Palm Beach, Jake from Syracuse, Kolkata, India, Nelson from San Antonio, Texas, Los Angeles, Maine, West Palm Beach, Detroit, Ave Ferris, Jared from Virginia, Nashville, Toronto, Christian from North LV. I don't know what LV is. Auckland, New Zealand, Joe Gale, longtime friend. Shout out to you, Joe Gale. We had a nice lunch today. Bermuda, Albany, Glasgow, Scotland, Texas, right? Ben from Hungary, Tom in Pennsylvania, congrats. Oh, sorry you missed it. Oh, thought you missed it. Mohsin from Iran, Nate Pano from Sydney, Australia, Chicago, Daniel from Oregon, didn't miss you, Daniel, New Hampshire, Nate from Chicago, Bergen, Norway, BDS, Mesa, Arizona, Castor Allen, Cleveland Pirate Alex, Flushing, Queens, Longview, Diego, Bogota, Colombia. Inspiring intro, says Dust James in North Carolina. Well, it's inspiring if you've done it. See, I know you, Dust, and you've got experience with the things I'm talking about. If this is unfamiliar territory, it might not be inspiring to you, but you know what I'm talking about. And I hope that all of you who listened will know what I'm talking about. And will be able to know and experience what I'm talking about. Some of you won't. LV is Las Vegas, right? Naples, Florida. Madrid, Spain. Ramiro in East LA. Shout out to you. And Ramiro's film is linked below. Check it out. Leipzig, East Germany. Days of War from Nowhere Important. All righty. Very, very good. Days of War from Nowhere Important. Brazil. So there you go. Vinicius in Brazil. Very good. Sean in Florida is with us. Welcome, Sean in Florida. Very good. Very good. Yes. All right. Harold Sullivan can't wait for the BreadTube book. Well, I can't either. I'm proofing it right now. I'm going to send it on to the proofreader. Should be out soon. A lot of good developments happening, for our community and for our channel. The Center for Political Innovation website should be back up soon. It's a new website, new location. It's being worked on. So thank you for everyone who's messaged me about that. Be sure to tweet this out. Be sure to put this on Facebook. Be sure to put this on Reddit, on social media. Capitalism works. We just don't have enough regulations. Just not enough regulations. Capitalism works. All right. All righty. So be sure to tweet this out, post this on Facebook, post this on Twitter, post this on Reddit. Spread the word, bring all your friends. The more people here, the merrier. Very good stuff. All righty. All righty. So the first super chat question I got was, how did major socialist states react to the Symbionese Liberation Army and the Red Army faction? Now, for those of you who do not know, the Symbionese Liberation Army was an ultra-left, adventurous terrorist group in the United States. And we'll just go over their history real quick. Why not, right? I think a lot of people don't know this stuff. So there was a communist group in the United States called the Revolutionary Union, RU. And they were a group of Maoists in the Bay Area. They were pretty big, and they were, Bob Avakian and the RCP eventually came out of that, but it was a much bigger group, the Revolutionary Union. Originally, it was the Bay Area Revolutionary Union, BARU. Eventually, they tried to go national and became the Revolutionary Union. But they had disagreements over Cuba, and they had disagreements about what kind of activism to engage in. There was a guy named Bruce Franklin, who is now a professor at Rutgers University. And he writes books on the history of the Vietnam War and literature and stuff. But Bruce Franklin, he led a split from the Revolutionary Union that was pro-Cuba and advocated urban guerrilla warfare and street fighting. So Bruce Franklin and his group, they left the Revolutionary Union and they formed something called Venceremos. And it was a communist activist group that supported Cuba. The RCP, the Revolutionary Union, said that Cuba was revisionist, wasn't really socialist. They supported Cuba, and they were interested in urban guerrilla warfare and street fighting and some of this ultra-left adventurous stuff. I don't think they ever did anything, but they talked about it. They promoted some of the writings of Regis Debray and Frantz Fanon, and they were more into the militant street fighting kind of stuff. So, they're ultra-left, right? So Venceremos started a prison visitation program. It's actually kind of interesting. So in the United States, in a lot of prisons, a lot of county jails and stuff like that, they have open visitation, meaning you don't have to know anybody who's in the jail. You don't even have to be there to see a specific prisoner. They have certain hours where if you want to go visit prisoners, you can just show up, right? So anybody off the street can just walk in and say, hey, and just talk to a prisoner, right? They have open visitation. So Venceremos, which was this split from the Revolutionary Union, they started doing prison visits in the hope that they would recruit the prisoners to be communists. So they're doing these prison visits in San Francisco. They're doing these, county jail prison visits, and a couple of their members started visiting. They met a prisoner named Don DeFries. And Don DeFries recruited them, I guess. They quit the Venceremos group, and these two people that had been in the Venceremos group, I think they started working with this guy, Don DeFries, and they formed a group of 9 people, a tiny little group they called the Symbionese Liberation Army, the SLA. And even the word Symbionese, that is not a word in the English language. There is no country called Symboia that they were from. It was because in biology, I guess, there's a process they call symbiosis. Symbiosis, where mitosis is when 2 cells divide, but I guess when cells come together, some biologist will have to correct me. My understanding is when some cells come together, that's called symbiosis. So Don DeFries and these 2 guys that were in the Venceremos group, they started the Symbionese Liberation Army. And their symbol was like a rattlesnake that had 3 heads. And they were this group, the Symbionese Liberation Army, and it was 9 people, some of whom were in Venceremos and some of whom were prisoners who'd worked with Don DeFries. They were the Symbionese Liberation Army. And the Symbionese Liberation Army, the first thing that they did, they were a left adventurist group. And they did specifically what Vladimir Lenin and all the great Marxists have said not to do, right? Not to do. They had this idea that they were going to commit an act of violence or terrorism, and that through doing that, they were going to then inspire a mass uprising. That never happens. It actually has the opposite effect. Generally, when leftists go around committing acts of violence and terrorism, what happens is the government uses that to crack down on leftists, number one. Number two, average people get scared of communists and leftists because they don't want to get killed or blown up or don't want to have the government arrest them, and it tends to isolate revolutionaries from the masses, right? Okay, Biden, Carter, Woodrow Wilson, Skank. All right, and so it's a bad thing for leftists to do. Lenin addresses this in his book What Is to Be Done. Many other places it's addressed. Left adventurism, terrorism is not a good thing, but it has this romantic appeal, right? People think they're movie stars. They think they're Bonnie and Clyde or Chuck Norris or something like that. So it's sexy, right? It's exciting, right? It's badass, but it's stupid, and it really harms the revolutionary movement, and it's a bad thing to do. But regardless, this group, the Symbionese Liberation Army, they were thinking about how they could spark a revolution by acts of violence. The first thing that they did is they killed Marcus Foster. Marcus Foster was the first African-American superintendent of schools in Oakland, California, if I'm not mistaken. And he made a policy. He was the first African-American to actually, take up, I think he was the superintendent. And it was a big deal, and he was widely loved in the black community. It was seen as a huge breakthrough that this African-American man became the school superintendent. And they shot him because of the fact that he had implemented a policy where all students had to carry ID with them, student ID. Right? I guess the Symbionese Liberation Army thought that was a fascist policy. So they killed Marcus Foster. And they didn't just, kind of kill him. They shot him with bullets that they hollowed out and put cyanide into. Okay? I mean, there was no way, this guy had no chance of surviving, right? It's one thing, you shoot somebody, they might die, they'll probably die. No, they killed him. I mean, they killed him dead, as they say. So they killed him. When this happened, many people assumed it was a right-wing group, a group of racists. They thought it was the Klan or the Nazis or something. They thought they were the ones that killed him. Turns out it was actually the Symbionese Liberation Army. And it was a pretty dumb thing to do. And they eventually ended up arresting, I think, the people who did it, and they ended up going to prison. So the next move from the Symbionese Liberation Army was that they discovered that, I guess, the Patty Hearst, who was the heiress, she was like the granddaughter of William Randolph Hearst, right? William Randolph Hearst was this really, really right-wing, pro-fascist, anti-communist media. The movie Citizen Kane is based on him. So William Randolph Hearst's granddaughter, I think, daughter or granddaughter, Patty Hearst, was going to college in the Bay Area. They figured out where she was in college, and they kidnapped her. And they abducted her. They kidnapped her, and they kidnapped her. They kidnapped Patty Hearst, and then they abducted her, and they took her hostage. And of course, she was beautiful and she was famous, and so this was all over the media because she was like a movie star, right? She was like a movie star. She was, beautiful. And so this was all over the media that Patty Hearst had been kidnapped. They kidnapped her, and they demanded that the Hearst family pay $2 million to low-income people. They give $2 million of free food away to low-income people in the African-American community in Oakland. So they did, and they actually, the Symbionese Liberation Army demanded that every item of food that they give away have their manifesto on it. So they spent $2 million to try and get their daughter back. And all these people in low-income areas got free food with the Symbionese Liberation Army's manifesto stapled to it. I mean, it's like nuts. So, and of course, the police, were resentful about all these low-income black people getting free food. And so, like, the police, they took turkeys and threw them at people's heads, and there were riots that then broke out. It was a pretty awful situation. But many people pointed out, though, that, the USA had a booming economy at this point. This was before the big economic downturn. But even then, the media really played up this idea that you were a bad person if you went and got any of that food from the Symbionese Liberation Army. They are kidnappers and all that. But still, thousands of people lined up to get food from the Symbionese Liberation Army. So that showed that even at a time when capitalism was in its boom, when, before the post-World War II economic downturn came to an end, even then, there was massive hunger throughout the United States. And that revealed that there were many, many people in the United States who, even despite being told by the media they were bad and all that, the fact that thousands of people lined up to get free food from this group of communists, communist terrorists that had forced it as ransom, that showed that there is, even at the time that it was supposedly a good economy here in the USA, thousands of people lined up to get free food. So that showed something. What's interesting is eventually Patty Hearst converted to being part of the Symbionese Liberation Army and refused to go back to, they were going to let her go, and she said, no, I'll stay. And, she took on the name Tanya. She changed her name to Tanya, and she started doing bank robberies with them. She was converted in the Symbionese Liberation Army. Eventually she got caught and she went to prison. Another wild story is that Sarah Jane Moore, and this is really wild. So the FBI and U.S. intelligence is obviously concerned about this violent terrorist group that is, kidnapping Patty Hearst and shooting school principals and such. And when the food was being given away, it occurred to them that some of the people who might volunteer with the food being given away might be sympathizers with the Symbionese Liberation Army. So this woman named Sarah Jane Moore, and I believe that Sarah Jane Moore, I think was she an Air Force intelligence officer or FBI or something like that? She was sent by the government to help give away the free food and spy on people while they were doing it. She was an informer. And while she was giving away free food in African-American communities and trying to spy on people to see if they could figure out if any of the people that were helping out were actually involved with the terrorist group, she became impressed with the Symbionese Liberation Army. Can't make this up. This is so nuts. She became impressed with the Symbionese Liberation Army. The more she read about them, she read their manifestos and all of this, she thought they were pretty cool. So then she went and tried to assassinate U.S. President Gerald Ford and went to prison for the rest of her life. I think she finally got out during the Obama years. But so then this FBI informer went and got converted while they were giving free food away and then went and tried to kill the president. So, I mean, you want to talk about insanity. This is the insanity of left adventurism, right? The future of socialism is with the broad masses of people. Ultra-left adventurism, terrorism, these kind of acts are detrimental to a revolutionary movement. They are the exact opposite of what revolutionaries should be doing. It's the last thing people should be doing. Ultra-leftism, terrorism, it's not a good thing at all. And but that's the Symbionese Liberation Army. I don't know as much about the Red Army faction. They used to call them the Baader-Meinhof gang. That was in Germany, and it was a similar group. They conducted bombings and assassinations. They called themselves Maoist communists or something like that. And it was a similar organization that existed in the early 70s. Now, I believe the direct question that I got was, what did major socialist states, how did they react to the SLA and the RAF? I don't know of any connection between a major socialist state and the Symbionese Liberation Army at all. I don't know of any connection. What I do know about is the Red Army faction, which was this terrorist ultra-leftist group in Germany, that they went to Palestine to try and get training from the PLO, from the Palestine Liberation Organization, and from Yasser Arafat. that they were Germans, but they went to Lebanon or Jordan. They went to some place that the PLO, that Yasser Arafat and the PLO was, to try and get training. And hilariously, the PLO was secular at that point, but it was a Muslim country. And so they got there, and they had a rule. They were very clear that men in this tent, women in this tent. Pretty clear. I mean, it's, generally when there's people living together, big groups of people, men in this tent, women in this, pretty clear, right? I mean, you don't have to be a Muslim to understand that. It's pretty, that's generally how people do things. Men in this tent, women in this tent. But the leader of the Baader-Meinhof gang, one of the perks of being the leader of an ultra-left adventurous terrorist group that is culty and all of that, one of the perks of it is all the women have to have sex with you. I mean, you can't make this, it's so disgusting. But, so I guess the leader of the Baader-Meinhof gang was quite angry that the PLO had this rule that he couldn't have all the women in his tent having sex with him. He was quite upset about this. So apparently they left. They stopped working with the PLO because the leader of the Baader-Meinhof gang was frustrated that they had a rule that he couldn't have all the women come in his tent all the time. The other thing about the Baader-Meinhof gang that I heard is that after they were arrested, Jean-Paul Sartre, the French philosopher who was like kind of an existentialist but had Marxist roots and all of this, decided he was going to go interview the leader of the Baader-Meinhof gang. And he was like, I am going to interview this guy, and I am going to get a cutting-edge interview, and it's going to be amazing, and I'm going to argue with him about left adventurism, and it's going to be this dynamic interview. And so, Jean-Paul Sartre, this amazing French intellectual, he's going to go interview this left adventurous terrorist, and they're going to have an intense discussion about what motivated him to take these acts. Jean-Paul Sartre went and interviewed the guy, and he found out the guy was a complete idiot. The guy, the leader of the Baader-Meinhof gang was a blathering idiot. He was like a drugged out lunatic. He would take LSD, he would take like 3 hits of LSD at a time, and the guy was a drugged out lunatic who was leading the Baader-Meinhof gang. He wasn't a genius, he wasn't a serious Marxist who had adopted left adventurist ideologies. The guy was a blathering lunatic. And Jean-Paul Sartre was deeply disappointed by interviewing the leader of the Baader-Meinhof gang and finding out that he was a blathering idiot. And I must say that, the same can be said for Charles Manson, right? I cannot finish a Charles Manson interview. The guy is a blathering idiot, okay? And it is beyond me. U.S. media spent hours and hours and hours. They will point cameras at Charles Manson. And, he's a blathering idiot. He's a blathering idiot. Charles Manson is a blathering idiot, okay? He's a blathering idiot. It's like he's incoherent. He doesn't make any sense. He doesn't have anything profound to say. But there are many TV interviews where they'll sit there and Charles Manson will just talk and he doesn't say anything. He's a lunatic. That's a lot of these ultra-left adventurist kind of people are blathering idiots. Right? Again, they become ultra-left adventurous. I'll just say this. They become ultra-left adventurous because they're not very smart, right? They can't write a good book. They can't persuade people with logical arguments to be socialists, but they want to be popular, and they want to be well-known. They want to be badass. So they say, well, I can't actually, organize anything, and I can't actually get anything done, but if I go blow something up or shoot somebody, then everyone will know who I am. I'll be a big shot, That's basically what it is. A lot of the weather underground people are blathering idiots. You listen to some of the interviews. Some of them are not, right? But some of them are, okay? Charles Manson, blathering idiot. The Symbionese Liberation Army, killing Marcus, blathering idiots. The Red Army faction guy, blathering idiots. A lot of the people that engage in ultra-left adventurism are not all there. It's not very well thought out. I'm sorry, but it's like you want to overturn capitalism, so you're going to go out and commit some act of violent terrorism, and then everyone's going to go, oh, by golly, somebody just committed an act of violent terrorism. By golly, that means we ought to get rid of capitalism. By golly, why, thank goodness you did that. Thank goodness you did that. I would never have thought of overthrowing capitalism before, but you committed this bombing or this explosion, and that persuaded me. It was propaganda of the deed, by golly. Thank you. Thank you. Thank goodness you didn't make any logical arguments or try to convince me or challenge some of the propaganda I've heard. Thank goodness you didn't build an organization in my community that would actually convince me of these things. Thank goodness you went out and did something violent and illegal. That persuaded me. I mean, it's propaganda of the deed. Thank goodness. Oh boy, I wish. I mean, it's like, give me a break. Give me a break. I mean, I'm sorry, but it's like, I mean, yeah, I mean, and it's, I've probably said too much. I've probably given way too long of an answer to this question, but it's worth asking. Somebody asked me, how did major socialist states react to the SLA and the RAF? And I don't know of any socialist state that had any relationship with the SLA. As far as the RAF, the only people that I haven't studied their history intensely, so I really don't know. But my understanding is that they did briefly have a relationship with the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, and that went south. And also that various people were very disappointed. And that's one of the things that happens, like when stuff like that, when stuff like this happens, right? Is that a lot of people, they will project their own ideas on them, right? At the time that the Weather Underground were doing their bombings, at the time that the SLA kidnapped Patty Hearst, the time that the Red Army faction, that they did their terrorism or whatever, a lot of people want there to be good guys, which is fine. I mean, it's fine to want there to be good guys. And so they will try to make these people into romantic heroes and stuff. They'll really try. They want there to be good guys. Right? And I will tell you, I mean, at the time Patty Hearst was kidnapped, there were a lot of young leftists who really, had some kind of admiration for them. Most average Americans did not. But among young kind of hippie counterculture people, there were a lot of them who went, whoa, that's so cool. There were a lot of them that kind of had a great admiration for them, at the time that they did that, right? And that people want there to be good guys. People want there to be good guys, and they tend to get a lot of publicity. Okay. CPUSA, Puerto Rico. They tend to get a lot of publicity, and, there's a lot of people that want to be able to cheer for somebody. I mean, nowadays with the internet, things are a little bit different, but it used to be, there were only 5 TV stations, and there's only so much out there. And, if you realize that the people running the country are the bad guys, you really want there to be good guys out there. So, some crazy ultra-left adventurous group comes along and does something. There's somebody you can cheer for, right? There's somebody you can applaud for on the news. That's how they feel. And it's unfortunate. It's really, really unfortunate. And at the end of the day, right, we know that this kind of thing, eventually these people get caught and eventually they go to prison. We've all seen, how many movies have we seen, where it's like, the hero eventually, gets caught, the hero becomes a criminal and eventually gets caught or something like that. And that's going to happen. These people are basically committing suicide, right? There's a whole book, Revolutionary Suicide by Huey Newton, and I admire Huey Newton a lot, but a lot of the themes in that book I don't particularly like. That's not my favorite work of his. And that, there's this assumption, I think, on the part of a lot of the people who engage in that kind of activity. It's like they assume that they're going to be caught, they're going to be killed, and they're just like, it's almost like they're committing suicide by system, right? They're committing suicide by cop. They don't really believe that you could actually have a movement that could actually organize people and could actually change society. They don't believe that. And part of them doesn't believe it. And they just kind of get into this mindset where they're like, well, I want to go down in a blaze of glory. I want to go down in a blaze of glory. I want to be remembered as somebody who fought against these MFers. And, that's a lot of that pessimistic synthetic leftism. Left adventurism is a deviation. Propaganda of the deed, George Sorel and Sorelianism and the romanticization of violence. All of this is a deviation from the optimism of Marxism. Marxism is a fundamentally optimistic ideology. It's that whole opening I just gave in there is about how much joy It gives people to be part of a revolutionary movement and to be organizing and to be building socialist communities that are actually getting things done, right? Socialism is a fundamentally optimistic movement. But left adventurism, left adventurous terrorism, the romanticization of it, all of this is really, it's really an internalization of pessimism, right? These people, it's like, they might as well go be school shooters. They might as well become an incel shooter. Or, it's the same kind of mindset. They're like, fuck my life. I'm so miserable. I hate my life. They're at the point where they almost want to commit suicide. They think, oh, I don't want to just commit suicide. I'm going to go down in a blaze of glory. I'm going to take a bunch of people down with me. I'm going to be remembered. And it's awful. We can do better than that. We can do so much better than that. We can do so much better than that. I tell people I'm a socialist, not because I want to destroy America, because I want to save America. Well, I'm a socialist because I want to live, not because I want to die, right? I'm a socialist because I want to live for a higher purpose and live for saving this country, not because I want to die in a blaze of glory, right? And that is, there are people who make great sacrifices, and I admire people who will make great sacrifices, get arrested for the labor movement. Gus Hall went to prison for how many years, and William Z. Foster was imprisoned at one point, and, people make great sacrifices, and that's admirable. But when people get into this mindset that we can't actually win, so I'm just going to go down in a blaze of glory, that's toxic. That's toxic. I'm a socialist because I want to live, not because I want to die. I'm a socialist because I want to save America, not because I want to destroy America. I'm a socialist because I want stability and a society where people don't have to worry about being unemployed and don't have to be hungry, where human wealth is expanding, not because I want a blaze of glory and destruction. And look, folks, this is a little bit of a weird thing to say, okay? And I'm taking a long time to answer this, but that's okay. We got a few, whatever. I'm not in a rush to get home or get any place. Monthly car caravans across the U.S. against the blockade of Cuba. Oh, okay. Car caravans against blockade of Cuba. And, a lot of left adventurism and a lot of left pessimism, I would argue, is sexual. It's sexual. And that sounds really weird, like you're saying this, Caleb. How can it be sexual? That doesn't make any sense. Well, look, have you ever watched the Wagner opera, right? The Ring Cycle, the Wagner Ring Cycle by Wagner. The last opera is called Götterdämmerung. And at the end of the opera, right, Siegfried, the hero, is killed, he's stabbed in the back, he's betrayed by a friend. So Brunhild, the hero, she lights his funeral pyre, and she gets on her horse, and she rides her horse into the funeral pyre, right? It's called the Brunhild immolation scene. And then the flames from the funeral pyre spread over the whole world, and the whole world bursts into flames. It's like the Armageddon. It's the Armageddon, the Götterdämmerung, the Ragnarok of Norse mythology. And the whole world bursts into flames, and then at the end, everything's at peace, and you hear the music of the Rhine River. Why is that desirable? It's beautiful if you watch it. You're just on the edge of your seat. It's very exciting. Why is that? Well, because everybody knows, and everybody knows this, right? And this is one of the things people have written about Wagner, is that Wagner's music imitates sex. All right? It imitates the sexual act. It imitates the orgasm, right? And that scene where, Brunhild is riding her horse, into the flames, and the flames explode. That's imitating the sex. That's imitating the orgasm, right? It's the musical orgasm, basically, right? A lot of good art does that. It's libidinal, as Hypatia Muse is putting it, right? A lot of good art does that, right? Think about your favorite song or whatever. It tends to reach a climax and then calm down afterwards. That's art, okay? Real life is not like the sex act. It's not, okay? I'm just telling you, right? Like, anyone who's ever been in a war will tell you war is not an orgasm. right? I mean, it's like war is not like you build up to this glorious climax and then everything's okay. No, anyone who's ever been in a war will tell you that is not what happens, right? Do you think the people in Gaza right now are like having some orgasm? And no, they're dying, okay? That life is not porn. Porn is not life, and life is not porn, okay? That's just a fact. But a lot of these people that are left adventurers, they have this, this image in their head that the revolution, it's going to be so bad. It's going to be so bad. People just won't be able to take it anymore. And then it'll explode and we'll rise up and it'll be glorious and everything will fall down and then everything will be peaceful. And that's the end. And I'm just telling you that's not how it is. You have a sexual narrative in your head. You have a pornographic narrative in your head, and you are projecting a sexual narrative onto your politics, right? That's what you're doing. And because pornography is everywhere in our society right now, right? I think that it's very hard to not think of real life in those terms because porn is everywhere in our society, everywhere. And so people think that revolutionary violence and all of that is going to somehow line up with a pornographic narrative. It's not, okay? It's not, right? The way revolutions happen is not like Gotterdammerung, right? It's just not like that. The world doesn't just burst into flames and then everything's better afterwards. And that's not how things work. Okay? It might make a fun rock concert to go to, might make a fun Wagner opera, might make a great action movie, but life is not porn, okay? And that ultra-left adventurism is, in a lot of ways, it's projecting pornography onto Marxism. Marxism is scientific, it's economic, it's meticulous, it's about data, and it is a projection of pornography onto politics. Look, and Lenin himself, right? One of my favorite quotes from Lenin, he talks about how during a period of demoralization, right, he talks about how after the 1905 revolution in Russia, when it didn't succeed, there was demoralization in the revolutionary movement in Russia. And he said very famously, this is in Left-Wing Communism, the book by Lenin, he says, pornography took the place of politics. And you can argue that a lot of synthetic leftism, a lot of left adventurism, is pornography taking the place of politics. These people have a pornographic narrative in their head. And there you go. And, we need to get over that. We need to get over that. So there you go. Someone said in the chat, you never know what you're going to get when you come on a Caleb Maupin stream. That is correct. That is correct. You never know what you're going to get when you get on one of my streams. You never know that. Someone asked a straight-up question about socialist states and the Symbionese Liberation Army, and I gave a very long answer, and we ended up talking about Wagner and porno and Patty Hearst and all kinds of stuff. So that shows, if you ask me a question, sometimes I will give you an answer that you don't expect. So there you go. Now the next question I got, and again, this will be another answer you won't expect. Someone asked me about the Socialist Workers' Party, SWP, right? It's a small, tiny little group in the United States. They used to be very big in the 1970s. They're really tiny now. The SWP, they have a newspaper called The Militant. Someone asked me about their positions. Well, I'll tell you, I'm going to give you an answer. I have reached out to the Socialist Workers' Party. I would like to interview them, because they are running a candidate for mayor. Roger Calero is running for mayor of New York City. So I sent an email and left a voicemail inviting them to come on this channel. I would like to interview them. So rather than answer the questions for them, I will actually, hopefully, if they get back to me, they may or may not. A lot of times people don't want to come on this channel. I don't get that, right? I mean, there was some socialist group that will not be named that had a candidate for president, and I said, want to come on my channel? No, never got back to me. Several times I reached out to them. Never got back to me. It's like, your loss. I mean, I got how many followers on my YouTube channel and their YouTube channel? It's like, they're lucky if they get 37 views on a video. It's like, your loss, you know? And generally, you know, I'm not going to like have you on my channel to fight with you. It's not a debate, right? A debate is a debate. But if you're a socialist who's running for office and you want to come on here for an interview where you just make your, I'm not going to debate you. I'm just going to let you come on here. You know, that's generally, you know, I mean, look, I mean, Daniel Burke, he and I, we disagree on things. He's LaRouchian, I'm a Marxist, right? He, you know, has his views, I have mine, but I didn't fight with him. It wasn't a debate, it was an interview. So, you know, I mean, if you're a socialist, you're running for office, I'll bring you on and we'll talk, you know. So yeah, I mean, the Socialist Workers Party, I reached out to Roger Calero, and I emailed him and I sent him left him a voicemail. I said, hey, you want to come on my YouTube channel? I got 16,000 followers. You want to come on here and talk about your campaign for mayor of New York City as an SWP? I'm down. So if Roger gets back to me, you know, you'll get to hear it from the horse's mouth. You'll get to hear exactly what the SWP thinks, because I have reached out to them and I would very much like to interview their candidate for mayor of New York City. So I'm not going to answer. They do take some positions that are certainly out of step with the rest of the socialist movement, no question about it. But I am going to give Roger a chance to tell you exactly what his campaign is all about if he wants to come on this channel. He doesn't have to, but you know, there's some other socialists. I guess there's a guy who's a Communist Party member who's running for office somewhere else. I'm going to have him on. You know, there's somebody from the PSL who says they're running for office. They want to come on this channel. Fine. Like, if you're a socialist and you're running for office, I'll have you on this channel. You know, it'll be pre-recorded. You know, it'll be pre-recorded. But you know, for the most part, I mean, I can think of like maybe 3 exceptions, which I'm not going to name. But other than those exceptions, if you're a socialist and you're running for office, you can come on this YouTube channel, right, to just talk. I had the Green Party candidate. He came on this channel. Howie Hawkins. Did you folks see Howie Hawkins? He came on this channel. He said a lot of stuff I did not agree with. Didn't care. I let him on here. So if you're a socialist, you're running for office, I'll bring you on here. But if you're, I mean, I don't know what you would possibly lose by coming on here. I don't care if you're a Trotskyite, social democrat, anarcho, whatever, I'll have you on here. So that's my policy. And I've already reached out to Roger Calero of the Socialist Workers Party to come on this channel. So hopefully he gets back to me, and hopefully I'm on Skype with him soon, and there's a video of me talking to him on Skype, and that'll be great. And I would have him on, and again, not to debate him. And that's my thing. I'm not going to debate these people. So there you go. Right? And often people will say to me, why did you have this person on and not this one on? Again, folks, you know, again, right? Some people I mean, a lot of people won't come on here. I don't know. A lot of people think they're going to be canceled, right? They think they're going to be canceled, right? They're going to think like, oh, well, someone's going to find the picture of Caleb with Dugan, and then they're going to have me with Caleb, and then it's like, well, I got to tell you, my friend, if you're worried about getting canceled for coming on this channel, give up being an anti-imperialist, give up being a socialist, because there's a lot more they can get you for. Just telling you, you know what I mean? And you can come on here. No one canceled Howie Hawkins for coming on this channel. Nobody, right? There's plenty of people who've come on this channel who haven't gotten canceled, and I've gotten canceled, and I just keep going and going and going and going and going and going. So, you know, I mean, as long as I'm here, I mean, maybe YouTube will cancel me, but until YouTube cancels me, I'm going to be here, and when YouTube cancels me, I'll set up somewhere else. So there you go. All righty. Outsourcing. Well, outsourcing is, so outsourcing, let me just reiterate what that is. Generally, it's our jobs going overseas, right? The company closes down the American factory and sets up shop in another country where they can pay lower wages. Probably the biggest aspect, the defining aspect of outsourcing is not simply outsourcing, it's technology. In order to do that, in order to outsource, you need technology to advance. It's really a result of the computer revolution. As a result of the computer revolution, they have been able to make products in so many different countries, right? That's really the result of the computer revolution, number one. Number two, a lot of people think there's no industry in the United States right now. That's not true. Weapons, military hardware is overwhelmingly made in the United States. There's a huge amount of domestic production of weapons and military hardware. It's just people don't do it, robots do, right? And at the end of the day, even like I said at the beginning, even the outsourcing that does happen is made possible by technology. The issue behind outsourcing is workers' competition with machines, the falling rate of profit. It's part of the problem of capitalism constantly trying to produce goods as efficiently as possible. It's part of the problem of capitalism and the revolutionization of the means of production. It's part of the whole thing that Marx and Engels talk about, overproduction. It's part of all of that. It ties into all of that stuff is where it ties into. It's not just about companies setting up their factories overseas. It's part of a bigger problem, which is capitalists constantly trying to produce as many goods as they can, but pay as little as they can in response to it. And pretty soon the market is glutted with products that cannot be sold. Overproduction. All righty. All right. What is the next anti-imperialist state to outstrip like China has? Well, China at this point, has a bigger economy than the United States. Now, China has a much bigger population than the United States, and there's still a lot of poverty in China. The extreme poverty has been wiped out, and they've done huge, amazing things. But I don't know. I can't think of an anti-imperialist state that has anything near the population that China has. Can't think of an anti-imperialist state that has as big of an economy as China has. So I don't think that's exactly a fair question, right? China outstripping the United States is huge. It's absolutely huge. But you have to remember there are specific historical circumstances, right? China had a socialist revolution. With that socialist revolution, spent decades and decades and decades building up their economy. That's huge. Then you add to that then the pandemic happened. It slowed down the global capitalist economy. But with their socialist central planning, they handled it much better than we did. They moved ahead. So there you go. All righty. Now, this person has asked about Chernobyl and the downfall of the USSR. Well, again, I am not an expert on Chernobyl, but the best video I've ever seen on it is Donald Quarter, who has the Revolution Report, did a great video on Chernobyl, dissecting the lies about Chernobyl in the Netflix HBO series about it. That was really great. And so as far as how did it relate to the fall of the USSR, I don't have the specifics for that, and I don't want to give you an answer that's inaccurate. So watch Donald Quarter's video on the Revolution Report. Go watch it. That's who I would recommend, because I have not spelled it, so there you go. All righty. All right. So what do you say to those? The next question I have is, what do you say to those who say the problem isn't capitalism? It's just that we need more regulations, right? There's a song about this. The bosses, politicians say we must vote our convictions. There's nothing wrong with capitalism, just needs a little fixin'. But communists around the world, we have the real solution. Reforms won't lead to workers' power. What we need is revolution. Anyway, sorry about that. I like to break into song every so often. But anyhow, well, what are we regulating, right? Because this is the funny thing. So libertarians, they argue that the problem with capitalism is all the regulations. Oh, all these regulations. We don't need regulations. And that's completely delusional, because a lot of the regulations that we have, the anti-monopoly regulations, are like you need them just to have basic things work in capitalism. For example, as I've pointed out here, it is illegal for a movie studio to own a movie theater. Did you know that? If you own movie theaters, you cannot own a movie studio. And why is that? Because, think like a capitalist. If you owned a movie studio and a movie theater, you'd only show movies that you made at your movie theater. And then you would have a monopoly, right? And so there's all kinds of antitrust legislation. Another thing that's illegal, right? I, as a journalist, can't own any stock. Why can't I own any stock? Why? Well, as a journalist, right, I could do stories. If I owned stock in some steel company, I could do stories about, oh, this steel company is doing really, really well. Everyone should go buy their stock. And then the value of my stocks would vastly increase. I could use my position in the press to advance my own money. So there's a law against that. right? There are many, like, in insurance, right? If you're an insurance salesperson, right, you get paid by, you sell insurance, and then you get a percentage you get your commission, which is a percentage of it. You are not allowed to give that commission to the people you sell it to. That's illegal. Why? Again, you try to make money, right? You would go to people and you say, hey, I'm going to get like $1,000 commission if your business buys here, so I'll give you 500 of it. And you can't do that. That's illegal, right? That's called, I'm trying to remember the name of the law, but there's a name for it. It's illegal. You can't do that. You can't do that. Can't do that. You cannot do that because that would lead to things not working right. You have to have all kinds of regulations just to make capitalism work as well as it does, which is not good. And then there's the cyclical crises. Right? Capitalism is known to have cyclical crises. Cyclical crises, which is that the capitalists have a huge leap in technology, which at first is very good. They're churning out lots and lots of goods. And pretty soon wages decrease. People can't afford to buy those goods, and the economy goes under. And it used to be every few years you would have what they called a panic, right? You go back to the Gilded Age that libertarians like to talk a lot about. You would have a panic on the stock market where all of a sudden everything would fall apart and banks would crash and everything would fall apart. And it used to be like a 1 to 2 year cycle. The economy would just crash. We have developed all kinds of mechanisms. If you could make capitalism work with regulations, we would have figured it out, because they've set up the Federal Reserve Bank. They've set up all kinds of mechanisms to try and make a naturally unstable system stable. All kinds of mechanisms. All kinds of mechanisms have been developed, and we still have the same problem. We still have the problem of jobs being eliminated by technology. We still have the problem of people getting poorer as the economy becomes more efficient. We still have the problem of poverty amid plenty. The natural instability of a system based on profits and production organized for profits doesn't go away until you start tampering with profits in command. You still have the boom-bust cycle, and you still have the problems. You can hold them off, you can take different measures, but at the end of the day, as long as you still have a system of production organized for profit, you're going to have these problems. So there you go. All right. Is Biden a Carter or a Woodrow Wilson skank? Well, I don't know. In a lot of ways, Biden's a lot like Jimmy Carter, pessimistic, trying to give the image the USA is retreating while escalating, covert efforts, pessimistic, seems old and tired, trying to calm everybody down. I know you're upset, people. I'm just trying to calm you down. I'm the president. Hey, man, I know you're upset. I'm Joe Biden. Calm down. Wear a mask. For God's sakes, just wear a mask. Wear a mask. It's the same tone. It's that kind of like frustrated tone, trying to conciliate everybody, trying to calm things down. Same kind of stuff. As far as Woodrow Wilson was a little bit different. Woodrow Wilson was, I believe he was a political science professor. And he kind of hijacked some of the feelings of the progressive era, right? That, coming out around 1900, 1910, there have been depressions and instability in U.S. society. And so the idea was we need somebody who's who's political science, a manager who knows what he's doing. And he was seen as taking a more scientific approach to politics. He was a progressive. And Woodrow Wilson, he revived the Ku Klux Klan, right? He screened the movie The Birth of a Nation at the White House, and the Democratic Party oversaw the revival of the Ku Klux Klan as a mass racist movement in the hopes of, getting rural Protestants who tended to vote Republican to vote Democrat because of the KKK. And he pushed prohibition for that reason as well, that prohibition outlawing the drinking of alcohol. Again, it was kind of a way to stir up, get, rural Protestants who tended to be religious and didn't believe in alcohol, to get them to vote for the Democrats. He believed in eugenics. and when he took office, he was reelected, and his slogan for being reelected was he kept us out of war. I kept us out of war. I kept us out of war. And then, right after he got elected, he got the USA into World War I. A lot of socialists and leftists voted for him on the platform. He kept us out of war, thinking that at least he would prevent the USA going to World War I, and then he took the country into war. And during the war, the USA became a very, very authoritarian country. They broke apart the Socialist Party, put all the leaders in jail. That's what the person who asked the question about Schenck versus the United States, right? Some guy was handing out leaflets saying, don't fight in World War I. They threw him in prison. Supreme Court ruling on it. Put Eugene Debs in prison for giving an anti-war speech. But more than that, somebody made a patriotic movie called The Spirit of 1776. And it was a movie they made, and the idea was the movie would inspire people to be patriotic and fight in the war. But the movie portrayed the British as bad, right? And the British were our allies in World War I. So the guy who made the movie went to prison for making The Spirit of 1776, for goodness sakes, right? They had these people that would patrol the streets, they were called, that would patrol the streets looking for seditious orators, right? And it was like they had this group of people that were like the political police, basically, who would patrol the streets of major cities looking for people who were seditious, meaning that they opposed the war, right? Will the revolution be televised? Woodrow Wilson was a pretty awful president. He did the Palmer raids, against immigrants and against communists, and he was a Bonapartist, right? In the lead up to World War I, there were a number of capitalist crises, and there were divisions in the ruling class, and he was a Bonapartist to some degree from the Democratic Party, who basically became the authoritarian strongman of the United States in order to set the stage for the USA going to war. And what's particularly disturbing is that they've done a lot to rewrite it. They've done a lot to try and make it sound like Woodrow Wilson was anti-racist when he was the opposite. He was a vehement racist and, basically jump-started the KKK in order to start his career. He said after World War I, he gave his, League of Nations and all that, and they try to make it seem like he was this really great guy, and he did call himself a progressive, right? And that was, again, it was kind of like he was going to apply science to politics, and there was this kind of vaguely liberal edge to what he was doing. But he hated communists, he hated socialists, he was pro-war, he was brutal, he was authoritarian, he was racist, he was an awful president in every conceivable way. There was not a good side to Woodrow Wilson whatsoever. He was a strong man of American imperialism, so, there's not much good to say about it. What infuriates me about that is that Glenn Beck, after Obama got elected, Glenn Beck and a lot of them had this whole thing saying Woodrow Wilson was a socialist. And I swear in this book, Liberal Fascism by Jonah Goldberg, and they've done all this stuff to say Woodrow Wilson was a socialist. And it's like Woodrow Wilson Woodrow Wilson put socialists in prison. Woodrow Wilson is the guy who broke the Socialist Party and locked up Eugene Debs. Woodrow Wilson was one of the most vehement anti-communists and anti-socialists ever. And William Z. Foster met Woodrow Wilson because William Z. Foster led the Great Steel Strike of 1919. And when William Z. Foster met Woodrow Wilson, he said Woodrow Wilson assumed that because William Z. Foster was a leader of a union, that he must be an ignorant fool. And so when he met at the White House, William Z. Foster went to the White House and met with Woodrow Wilson. And Woodrow Wilson asked him to call off the strike. And he said he spoke to him in roughneck talk. Roughneck talk. Roughneck talk. Now, I don't know what roughneck talk from Woodrow Wilson would sound like, but Woodrow Wilson, assuming that William Z. Foster, this leader of this huge union and this well-known, labor leader and all that, assuming that he was an ignorant fool, spoke to him, in roughneck talk. I mean, this here strike you're having hurts our economy. See, it was like, he spoke to William Z. Foster in the most condescending tone. Woodrow Wilson was a real classist, if there ever was such a thing. He really did believe working people were inferior, were rabble, and that's very blatant. I mean, he came from money. He was part of that Eastern establishment that we talk so much about on here. That Eastern establishment, of New England, old money, that might have much more of a managerial approach. You can talk about the Council on Foreign Relations. You can talk about the Round Table Group, right? And you talk about Cecil Rhodes, who Rhodesia was named after. That's formerly Zimbabwe. When he died, he left in his will all this money for the creation of a secret society to promote the British Empire. And it wasn't a secret society really. What came out of it was something called the Round Table Group. And it was a think tank that was set up in the United States and in Britain of people to promote the ideals of British imperialism and eugenics and Malthusianism. And, the Rockefeller family got involved in it and all of that. And there's a very good book called The Anglo-American Establishment, where you can read about this wing of American capitalism, right? And the neocons come out of this wing. The new left, the fake synthetic left, comes out of this wing, and it's a wing of American power. It's the four super major oil companies, it's the Morgans, and it's a wing of the American power structure called the Eastern Establishment. It's in both parties, and it's a wing of American power. It's the most powerful wing of American capitalism. It's the dominant faction in imperialism. It's the Anglo-American establishment, the Eastern establishment, the New England faction. I don't know what you want to call it, but that's probably the most powerful faction in the USA. And that faction, that's the faction that Woodrow Wilson comes out of. And big tech emerged from it, right? Big tech is kind of its own center of gravity, but it emerged from the Eastern establishment. The Eastern establishment has been in power in the United States since the 1890s. They've been the dominant faction. Big tech emerged, they set up big tech strategically for their own reasons during the Cold War, but now big tech kind of has its own energy. Big tech is a little bit different in its perspective, but they're connected. They ultimately have the same agenda, but they have different worldviews. You get a lot of libertarians in big tech. I mean, it's a little bit complicated. And I talk about these things on different lives. We got a couple more super chats to get through before we wrap this up. All right, Communist Party USA and Puerto Rico. I don't know enough about it. I did hear that, they did take. I heard it was a couple years ago. The Communist Party took independence of Puerto Rico out of its platform. But then I've heard that they took it out before, and then they added it. And I know that in 1940, when Earl Browder ran for president, he made independence of Puerto Rico a big platform in the campaign. But I also know that Puerto Rican independence doesn't have the same level of support among Puerto Rican Americans that it once had. During the 1970s and 80s, it was huge. Most Puerto Ricans wanted independence. Among Puerto Rican Americans, especially in New York City, it's not the same, right? And that there are not everyone in the Puerto Rican political movement wants that necessarily anymore, right? I mean, a lot of folks do, and I'm not here to speak for them. And there's certainly a big group of people who do want Puerto Rican independence, but a lot of it's not as popular as it once was. I obviously, if the people of Puerto Rico, if the Puerto Rican people, not Western tourists, but the people on the island of Puerto Rico want independence, I am for it. I am for independence of Puerto Rico if that's what the people want. But you have to be careful with that. Just like the Black Belt, just like the Sun Belt, you got to be careful with that because, if the people of Puerto Rico, if there is a mass movement of Puerto Rican activists that want independence, I'm for it. All righty. Cool. Car caravans against the blockade of Cuba. Capitalism and spirituality. car caravans against the blockade of Cuba. Well, they've been doing that for years, right? Pastors for Peace, the Venceremos brigades, they've been driving around having these potlucks to talk about the blockade, and they've been doing great work. I have huge admiration for those folks. Pastors for Peace, Venceremos brigade, those folks are great folks, that what they do. Raising awareness about the blockade of Cuba and how it affects people. They do great work, great work. I think that's great. I mean, I know that they're always going around. I mean, they go around from city to city, and they've been doing this for decades, and I have huge admiration for the work that they do and how they engage in civil disobedience, basically, to break the blockade. Amazing. I mean, they do great work, and we should end the blockade of Cuba immediately, right? The Cubans should be able to trade with any other country. The blockade of Cuba, it's horrendous, right? The Cuban people have made great strides in terms of healthcare and education, but they've done it with a crippling blockade imposed by the United States. Some of it was lifted by Obama, but then Trump restored a lot of it, and they need to end the blockade. It's that simple. All right. They always talk about free trade. Why not free trade with Cuba? All righty. Will the revolution be televised? No, the revolution will not be televised, but it will be on YouTube. It will be on YouTube, or at least it will be live streamed. Maybe not on YouTube. I think YouTube will take it down, but it'll be on live stream somewhere. All righty. That was kind of a tongue-in-cheek answer, but there you go. That's a very famous. It's just like a poetry piece that was like an audio recording. The revolution will not be televised. Very famous. But there you go. All right, and the relationship between capitalism and spirituality. That's the next question I've got on here. Capitalism and spirituality. Well, look, many argue that capitalism is a detriment to spirituality because capitalism puts money above moral principles, puts money above right and wrong. Under capitalism, the logic of capitalism would say that, if you have $1 million worth of pornography and you have $1 million worth of, scientific literature, you have the same value, right? It's $1 million. But clearly, pornography and scientific literature have very, very, very different value. But under capitalism, where we measure things in terms of money, they both have the same value, and that is the problem. That capitalism, right? Supply and demand, supply and demand. It assigns things value based on their monetary value. At the end of the day, it's not a very good way of determining what's valuable. And the drive for gold and the drive for money is destroying civilization. We've known this, right? We've known this. You go back to medieval times. There's a reason they called it filthy lucre. Most people could not touch money, right? Money was considered to be sinful. Money was sterile, right? And that the system of capitalism, production organized for profit, society organized around people who own the means of production and operate them for profit, is detrimental, I think, to the spiritual health of society. I would say it absolutely is, right? That a society where money comes first, not good. Are tech monopolies doomed? I'd say so. Yeah, eventually they will have competitors. They will have people from around the world that are competing with them, and they're trying to hold off that process as long as they can. But yes, I would say that it's only a matter of time before the tech monopolies are no longer monopolies, and they know that. That's how capitalism works. There's not much they can do about it. They're trying to artificially prolong their life as tech monopolies, but there will soon be an alternative to Facebook, an alternative to Twitter, an alternative to YouTube that is just as big, and they know that, right? That Silicon Valley is not going to rule the world forever. Right? Just like the people Catholic Church, when they had the printing press, pretty soon their opponents got it as well. Silicon Valley will not rule the world forever. So that's just the way it is. And on that note, folks, I'm tired and I've got to cut it off here. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Be sure to hit the like button, be sure to hit the subscribe button, be sure to hit the notifications bell. And don't forget that we need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. And check out Ramiro's documentary. It's right below. Ramiro's documentary is great. Nicaragua Against Empire. Great stuff. So check that out. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night.